Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third and final California Broadband Council meeting in the year of 2021. Certainly a lot of updates that you will be getting from the staff. And I do wanted to go ahead and have our staff to call roll to make sure that we have quorum to begin this meeting, and then we'll go from there.
Good morning, Director Tong.
Here.
Ms. Smith.
Here.
Dr. Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Houck.
Here.
Mr. Mallon.
Here.
Mr. Winkler.
Here.
Mr. Jameson.
Present.
Ms. Pepper. Lori, are you here? Oh, she's arriving late. Apologies. Ms. McPeak.
Present.
Mr. Flores. Mr. Flores, designee for Secretary Ross. Mr. Lucas.
Here.
Ms. Snyder.
Here.
We have a quorum and two friendly reminders, one for presenters to queue when you would like the slide changed, and the other is for attendees to please remember to mute yourselves.
All right.
Sorry, I was on mute. Michael Flores here.
Great, thank you, Michael.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Cheers for that. As I mentioned that this is our third and final, which means that there are tons of information that the team has put together and present to this council, as well as those the public members of the public who is watching today. A little bit of a procedure update to ensure that there's a good concentration on, attention being paid to the presenter, as well as a dedicated period for open comment, or I should say public comment, per the meetings Beckley-King rule, is that the chat function is disabled. However, when the public comment period is opened at the end of this meeting, there will be opportunities for the members of the public to raise their hand using the the feature in Zoom. And if you are not familiar with that capability, just feel free to actually raise your hand, and then our moderator will be calling folks to present their public comment. I think that's probably the only rule change that I'm aware of. And in each of the section, because there's a lot of presentation today, I will open it up to make sure to circle back with the Broadband Council members to see if you have any questions or comment you wanted to make after each of the presentations. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get this ball rolling. Wanted to see if any of the council member want to do any opening statement before we hand it to staff for the presentation. Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and move forward. Is that if somebody could advance the slide, please? Okay, so Scott, I think you're on.
Thank you, Director Tong, and hello, members of the Broadband Council and the public. It's a pleasure to be here today. While we posted the agenda, just wanted to run through what we're going to be covering. We'll start with the state broadband and digital literacy update. Then we will shift our focus to action plan updates on long-term items and hear from the various responsible entities there. We'll hear a brief update on the Broadband Middle Mile Initiative, an update on last mile funding programs from PUC, legislative updates, and then have an open discussion for the council members on the 2022 council focus, and then public comment. Nicole, next slide, please. So just going to give you a real quick update on the broadband office. And Nicole, next slide, please. Wanted to really, refocus an overview of our efforts, given that over the last year or so with the pandemic and steps that were taken to address the persistent digital divide in the pandemic that were taken that have increased, our responsibility and workload. So historically, our role has been to interact with the statewide broadband ecosystem, all entities working to bridge the digital divide. We, have, as a result of Director Tong being the chair, the additional responsibilities to support and monitor the work of the Broadband Council, which was really expanded under the Broadband for All program, which began with the governor's executive order, and then the completion of the Broadband for All action plan in December of 2020. Over the summer in July, with the chaptering of Senate Bill 156, the office also had some additional responsibilities, significant ones, to oversee the statewide open access middle mile network and be a single point of contact for that effort. Next slide, please. So we are growing our staff to help us continue to effectively manage and implement the work that we're charged with. So we'll be introducing new team members. Today we wanted to introduce, we're very happy to introduce a new team member. The governor has recently appointed Mark Monroe to be the Deputy Director of the Broadband Middle Mile Initiative. He will take over the day-to-day and just overall oversight of the Middle Mile Initiative and be the single point of contact for the third-party administrator, state agency partners, and Middle Mile Advisory Committee and the legislature. And Nicole, I'm going to ask you to take the slides down real quick, because I wanted to have Mark introduce himself to the Broadband Council members and say a few words. Mark? I see Mark Monroe here. Mark, I want to make sure we give you the time, but we also know you're on the agenda later.
Why don't we come back to Mark? He might have stepped away.
Got it. Okay, Nicole, next slide, please. So what we really wanted to clarify now is the broadband roles within CDT and the broadband office. So with Mark's appointment, like I said, he will take over the oversight of the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative, and then I will be focusing on the overall Broadband for All. So, continuing to work with the council to monitor and support the work in the implementation of the executive order and the Broadband Action Plan. And what's really important, what we tried to demonstrate on this slide, is that Mark and I are going to be, sitting very closely and coordinating at an individual level and at a programmatic level to make sure that the Middle Mile and the Broadband for All program are being leveraged to support and augment each other. And so I want to give Mark a chance, if he's back, to introduce himself.
I don't, let's keep moving, Scott. I think we
Got it.
will. Oh, I think Mark is back right now. Hey, Mark, can you hear us? See, Mark?
Well, Mark's on the agenda down below.
Yeah, let's just do it then. Oh,
Okay.
hey, Mark, just looking up. There you go. All right, go ahead. Try to do the intro again. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, we had just, shared with the council members and the public our extreme pleasure that you've been appointed to take over the Middle Mile Initiative, and wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the members and say a few words about your extensive experience and excitement to be a part of the project.
I think he's having trouble hearing us. Let's take it offline. Sounds like there might be some technical difficulties. Keep going, and then when his time is up, we'll bring him back up.
Got it. Well, Amy, that concluded the update portion for the broadband office, and we were going to move on to the action plan updates and the long-term items. So for this section, what we really wanted to focus on is, this year has been getting the executive order and the broadband plan action items up and running. At our February meeting, we talked about how to implement the broadband action plan. At our May meeting, we heard updates on the governor's broadband executive order from key parties. And at our August meeting, we heard updates about broadband action plan short-term items, which were anticipated to be completed within 2 years. Today, our focus is going to be to hear updates on the broadband action plan long-term items, those that were anticipated to take longer than 2 years. So we're going to start in order of the items and lead agencies or departments. We're going to start with CPUC, who will cover action plan items that they are responsible for. I'd like to ask Michael Minkus from our partner agency CPUC to take over.
Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So I'm Michael Minkus. I'm a policy advisor in the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission, and I'll speak briefly to 3 California Public Utilities Commission action plan updates for long-term items 3, 10, and 12. So first we have item 3, which is on Universal Service Program updates. And it's to modernize California's universal service programs to support the deployment and ongoing maintenance of broadband networks effectively. So next slide, please. A number of legislative actions this year furthered implementation of this item, and there will be more discussion during the legislative item. Briefly, major legislation on policy and budget bills updated and augmented the California Universal Service Programs to support broadband, notably the California Advanced Services Fund Broadband Grant Program. Next slide, please. This is for action plan item 10 related to consumer protection, surcharges, and licensing requirements. So specifically, it's to establish clear standards of consumer protection and provisioning of equitable service by providers, evaluate the surcharge collection and overall bill impacts, including other non-public charges to minimize total customer bill impact, examine whether broadband service in underserved and unserved communities is consistent with current licensing requirements. Next slide, please. So legislation on surcharges, consumer protection, licensing requirements, and broadband data collection was signed into law. That's listed here. And on the agency side, the CPUC rulemaking on this slide is considering updates to the California Universal Service Fund surcharge mechanisms. The judge in that proceeding released a schedule update recently, and an updated staff report is anticipated this month with a anticipated final decision to be adopted in the second quarter of 2022. And it is a chance to note that federally, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that's still being considered in Congress includes a number of relevant provisions. One is that it would direct the Federal Communications Commission, the federal counterpart, to report to Congress on the future of the Federal Universal Service Fund, the federal version of the state program. And in addition, it would direct the Federal Communications Commission to open a docket to consider rules around preventing digital discrimination. And finally, on consumer protection, the infrastructure bill proposes to make permanent the emergency temporary federal broadband subsidy we'll touch on later. And in doing so, the Federal Communications Commission is to promulgate consumer protection rules for consumers that participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program, the successor to the emergency broadband benefit. Next slide, please. Finally, for the last of the updates this morning, Broadband Action Plan item 12 relates to the California Lifeline program. Specifically, improve the California Lifeline program by including standalone broadband service and work in partnership with internet service providers to encourage participation in the program. Next slide, please. Again, a number of federal and state activities and legislation are relevant to the action plan item. The federal government enacted a time-limited $3.2 billion national program for emergency broadband discounts, the emergency broadband benefit to qualifying households. And the 6 months for that program would end in November unless it is extended or augmented by the federal legislation. In addition, California adopted a number of bills modifying the California program, including Senate Bill 394 WASO listed here, revising the definition of households. And on the agency side, the CPUC continues to consider modifications to the California Lifeline program rules. So that concludes my update for the Public Utilities Commission on these long-term items.
Thank you, Michael. So Amy, or Director Tong, I think we can do this two ways. We can go through all of the information updates and then open it up to questions on those.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the council member, because I know there are several action plan items are receiving updates today, which is outstanding. If the list is fairly long, it might be hard for the council member to ask question or kind of remember. So maybe we can do a little bit of a compromise. If anybody compelled that they want to just jump in after each item, let's just go ahead and please feel free to do so. And I see Sunny is already raising her hand. Perfect, Sunny, always modeling the way. And then that way, oh God, there's two more. So perfect, let's just do that. And then we can keep this rhythm going for the rest of the item. So start with Sunny, please.
Thank you, Chair Tong. I want to ask a question to you, Michael, because can you just sort of elaborate on what you think are the implications of the change in the definition of households? What does that mean for all of us in planning and then outreach in terms of adoption?
I think briefly, let me pull up my notes here. It would be something, should the program be extended to support broadband, that could make it more easily to comply with the federal program rules and the state statute, because people who were separate households could receive the same benefit even if they lived at the same address.
All right, I see a nodding head. Ms. Cpuc, I think that's okay to answer with you. All right, thank you. All right, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. So I just had a question, appreciate the updates. I had a question on item 10. Can we go back to that? Because maybe I made it up in my mind what I thought I saw. No, the cover slide. There we go. Examine whether broadband service in underserved and underserved communities is consistent with current licensing requirements. How will that be done, and will that be reported out?
Briefly, that's it's a much broader kind of chunk of work, for lack of a better description. And so one of the relevant changes this year is that one of the many different types of licensing that the Commission oversees, the Digital Infrastructure Video and Competition Act franchises or licenses, were amended by Senate Bill 28. And in doing so, the Commission was directed to consider updates or changes to consumer protection rules and requirements. So that's the most direct, immediate aspect, but there are a number of other types of Commission administered licenses or telecommunications and broadband service licenses that could be relevant in the future.
Okay, just to follow up. So Mr. Gibson obviously is interested, as you all know, from his advocacy for AB 1425 as it relates to communities and families that live in public housing. And so I know this may be an internal conversation, but I know that Mr. Gisman would be very interested and curious how you all are thinking about that. It may not be something, it says examine, it doesn't say report out, but of course we'd love to add that lens around public housing residents as it relates to service to undeserved communities. I know you mentioned licensing, I'm going broader than that, but we'd love to just stay in the loop on how you will fulfill that last piece. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sarah?
Hi, yeah. So I just at high level, I wanted to ask about the timelines because I think you mentioned them, but I'm not sure if it was on the slide, which is the timeline for, I understand there's going to be multiple phases of this proceeding, but what is the time frame for a decision from the commission on the locations of the middle mile and the local assistance funding that was included in the trailer bill?
There's an update on the last mile implementation later on the agenda. So that is most directly related to the question on the local assistance.
Okay.
But you know, so that I'm being responsive, that is anticipated, a proposed decision is anticipated on or before December 1st. And then on the middle mile, I defer to the other partner agencies and the Department of Technology, and I think there's an update on that topic later on the agenda also.
But isn't the PUC, are you guys not doing that through proceed? I mean, the legislation requires the PUC to make recommendations.
Right, and I'd still want to coordinate and defer to how we talked about that publicly, but I'm glad to get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Sunny, I believe that hand was from earlier question, unless you have a follow-up. Okay. You're mute, but I read your lip. I think that's a yes. Got it. Thank you. No problem. All right, Scott, let's proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Michael and PUC. Really appreciate the updates, and just want to underscore again these. What we're hearing updates on are the long-term action items, and the reason we determined that they were long-term is we know that there's a lot of dimensionality and nuance and dependencies on moving these forward. So really appreciate the updates of where you are thus far. Next up, we want to call on our partner Josh Rosa from the Housing and Community Development to give an update on action plan item number 13.
Thank you, and good morning, council members and chair. Josh Rosa, Unit Chief with the Department of Housing and Community Development, reporting on our progress on action item number 13. This action item directs HCD to leverage our housing funding programs to provide free broadband service for tenants in newly built housing. And it really focuses on the role of the property itself, the physical property, as well as the management in extending the availability, access, and adoption of broadband, with direction to consider opportunities for providing 120 megabits per second broadband service free of charge to tenants in subsidized units. Next slide, please. So guiding our work on this from the beginning has been the action plan itself and its identification of those 5 main roadblocks to connectivity. Our department is not the expert on broadband issues, so we look to the experts to guide our early work on this. And so The action plan has been really informative and a source of guidance for us, and we seek to anchor our work in addressing each of these 5 roadblocks at each step. Next slide, please. So the program that we're working on currently is our multifamily housing program. This is HCD's flagship program, as we often call it, because it's the most regularly and heavily funded program. It consists of providing subsidized loans to developers to build, rehabilitate, or preserve rental housing for lower income households, with special consideration for senior, special needs, and supportive housing. So we have an upcoming round of our MHP program. We're working on the guidelines that will govern that round. The guidelines are planned to be adopted this fall, and then a notice of funding availability will announce the total amount available, as well as inviting applications in February. So this will be a pretty big investment in overall housing stock. Draft guidelines have already been released, and we've received some public comment. And I'll talk a little bit about the scoring criteria in the draft guidelines that will appear in the final guidelines incentivizing broadband. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So these are the new criteria, and we haven't done this before. So the new scoring criteria in MHP will set a threshold requirement for a certain level of broadband to establish the floor. And then there will be additional points available for properties that can meet a higher bar. MHP is a heavily competitive program, so we consider scoring criteria with a great deal of seriousness, because they will be determinative in project selection ultimately. So the threshold requirement that we set, which applications need to meet just to be considered, addresses availability. And so that requires the project to meet the 25.3 upload download speeds for broadband, which is right, the FCC defined speed for broadband. So we set that floor, and that's a modest floor. The reason that we have to do it that way is because we fund projects throughout the state who have access to varying levels of municipal fiber networks or lack thereof. So with the goal ultimately of providing subsidized housing for low-income households. So for that reason, we do have to be relatively modest in setting the threshold requirement. But we do really want to push our applicant pool to think assertively and creatively about going above and beyond that minimum threshold. And so we're establishing scoring criteria that will award additional points for properties that can meet the 120 threshold for broadband speeds. And in addition to that, they have to achieve at least one of those 3 sub-bullets that you see listed there, which includes providing the internet service for free or a subsidized price, or providing device support, which could include tablets, laptops, or a computer lab, or finally providing digital literacy training, which would include multilingual training, multicultural training, and all the end user support that's necessary to make sure that the service is actually. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline. So we're about halfway done with our process. We did receive some public comment on the draft guidelines with the scoring criteria. Nothing really game-changing, and we're prepared to adopt final guidelines with the same criteria next month. And then the notice of funding availability once the total funding pot has been determined, which typically doesn't happen until just before the NOFA, would be in the month of February. Next slide, please. Other actions, to continue implementing action item number 13, we're not stopping short of this one program. We are examining future funding programs that we might be able to use to leverage and extend broadband availability in subsidized housing. The new state budget allocates $300 million to our department to reinvest in our portfolio of existing properties. And these are properties where HCD has made an investment. We have affordability requirements that are nearing their expiration date. And these are properties that are at risk of defaulting to the market. So this $300 million program is in place for us to extend those affordability requirements, reinvest in the property. Very often goes hand in hand with upgrades to the property, which so long as we're doing the upgrades, this program might also set incentives or requirements for ensuring that the property meets that 120 benchmark for broadband service. So I think we're still in the early stages of investigating that program for compatibility with this. I think that we're hopeful to come to some conclusions in the weeks ahead. And in addition to action item number 13, funding programs, of course, on a related topic, we're also working to prepare data and recommendations for CPUC regarding CASIF in order to meet our obligations under the executive order 7320. And these two work streams are really mutually reinforcing and they inform one another. Our experience with MHP will inform the recommendations we provide to CPC ultimately. And yeah, I think that's all I got. Next slide.
Hey, thank you, Josh. Really appreciate the extensive update and the work you all are doing. Knowing again, this is a long-term action item, so there's a lot of pieces and really appreciate how you folks are approaching it. Amy, per what we have set up, did you want to ask the members if they have any questions?
Yes, I wanted to give the members opportunity to chime in while they're doing that. Feel free to raise your hand. Josh, I do wanted to commend you for HCD's progress on this. I especially like, the refresher of the 5 roadblocks, right? And that it's very common in many of the situation when there's a digital divide. So I'm very happy to see there's a systematic approach to address those 5 roadblocks, because connectivity alone, it's only one of the challenges, but really the affordability, the availability, and the ability to adopt with equipment at the very end of it is really helping to provide that level of services needed for our residents. So I really like that approach. Any comments or questions from the council member? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Josh, for that. And let's move to the next presenter.
Got it. Thanks, Amy. Next, Department of General Services is going to give an update on action plan item number 7, and Jason Kinney will be doing the presentation. Jason?
Yeah, hi everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Happy to present. We're talking about action item 7, which is on the screen there. We're supposed to identify state property for possible use for broadband infrastructure based on specific criteria identified by PUC, Caltrans, and other relevant agencies to accelerate broadband deployment. So I'm going to give you an update on a little bit of where that stands. My goal here is twofold. I do want to maybe explain some helpful background and context on state property that may explain why this is a longer term goal and just be helpful in general. And then second, I want to share some exciting progress that we've made so far. So first, I want to start with just some basic terminology, and forgive me if this is a little didactic, but All state property is really owned by the state of California, and it is held in trust. And the word we use is jurisdiction by state departments. So DGS doesn't own property, state of California owns property, and DGS manages that property on behalf of the state of California. Same thing with DMV or CHP or state hospitals or CDCR. They have jurisdiction over it. Each department is supposed to be using that property to further their mission, whatever that happens to be. And the moment in which that property or portions of that property are no longer in furtherance of their mission, they declare it to be excess. And excess property is then property that DGS generally, there's some exceptions to that, but generally DGS steps in to help departments figure out what to do with it. Do we lease it out long term? Do we transfer it to another state agency? If there's no additional potential state reuse, then we go to the surplus property process, which requires an act of the legislature, and then DGS on behalf of the department would actually sell the property or otherwise get rid of it. And I'm gonna come back to this terminology later on in my slides, but that's kind of the basic framework for property. In addition to that, there is something called the statewide property inventory. This is existed for a number of years. The government code actually requires DGS to maintain an inventory of state property. And it's supposed to be the property repository of record for state property. Now, that said, there's a big but to this. Statute defines what is reported and by whom it is reported. And so not every piece of data about a property or a building is required to be captured. And interestingly enough, not all state properties are actually required to be reported to us. And so while SPI is going to consider, capture the majority of state property that's out there, it's not going to have everything. So it is our go-to source, but there will be instances, and I'll cover this a little later, in which it's not 100% comprehensive, and we would need to bring in other departments to sort of fill in some of those gaps. The other big background information that's useful, kind of going back to this concept of jurisdiction, is that each department, because they have jurisdiction over their property, is ultimately the decision-making entity as to what happens with that property unless they declare it to be excess or surplus. And so there are transactional entities like DGS who are responsible for developing property, leasing property, selling property, those sorts of things. We work on behalf of those state agencies. And so there's not a central entity who can say, all right, we're going to go take this property or we're going to go use it for this purpose. It's a much more collaborative process when we want to develop something or do a long-term lease or whatever else. So that's the first little bit, and I realize I'm not telling you to switch slides, but you're doing an excellent job already, so forgive me. All right, so transitioning topics into this idea of a search. So we were asked to, or directed, I should say, to do a search of potential properties that could be used for broadband development, and that search is dependent on criteria. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of just this concept of criteria for a second. There are some obvious ones, and that's what's on your slide here. Location, property type, size, what kind of nearness it needs to have to other things, whether that's underserved areas, whether that's existing towers, those sorts of things. These are the easy property parameters that can be refined, and we're kind of working already with PUC, CDT, Caltrans on some of these. Next slide, please. There is a little more complicated set of criteria. That's the development method. There is a pretty big difference in the types of properties that could be available for this use, depending on kind of how they get developed. And so if someone said we want to sell property, that's a very, very limited subset. In fact, statewide, typically there's a couple of dozen excess or surplus properties. There's not much. And so selling property to somebody gives you a very limited universe. Leasing is a much, much bigger universe, potentially. The construction type matters a great deal. Are we talking about, erecting a service tower on vacant land? Are we talking about putting antennas on buildings? Are we talking about, putting, conduit underground? Obviously, I'm sure all of those things are fully in the mix, but depending on sort of the preferred development model in certain locations or by provider, there's definitely differences in those property searches. And so this idea of sort of the development model is a really important criteria set. Next slide, please. And then the other thing I think is important as we're talking about criteria And again, part of the reason why this is a longer term process is because SPI doesn't have both every aspect of property data one might want, and because not all property is in it, we do have to bring in other entities. And in some cases, those entities have much more manual records. Our property inventory is a GIS enabled database. And so it is something, as we bring other entities in, they may have paper records, they may have longitude, latitude points as opposed to exact parcel boundaries, those sorts of things. And so it's something that we really want to make sure that there's really, really solid dialed in criteria. So when we do a much more robust search, it's something that we're doing it ideally once or very few times to avoid having to constantly iterate because of those manual data sources in the manual process. Next slide. But that said, I am happy to report again that we've had some really great initial conversations with the departments listed there. And PUC was kind enough to provide us with some really a great starting point. So a middle mile map with the associated census designated places with households underserved. And then the other big criteria in terms of adjacency was property, and that was real and structures, so vacant land and land with structures within 5 miles from that network. Next slide, please. And what you see to the right, I'll just kind of start there, is the results. And so those sort of gold or yellow squiggly lines would be the middle mile network, and the green and red dots would be state property within the 5 miles to those locations. And so what's really exciting about this initial effort, not to say that it's done, not to say that we have all the criteria we would need to do a full, to do something, ultimate and final, but to kind of just showcase the alignment between existing state property and where the middle mile network needs to be and the opportunities to leverage there is a really exciting thing, I think. The green dots represent structures, the red dots represent real property. Obviously, if there's a green dot, there's a red dot underneath it. But in some cases, we've got property without structures on it, which is why there's some red without green. And so really exciting potential here. There are, of course, some qualifications, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up. Number one, when we say there's structures, most of these are in active use. Some are prisons, some are state hospitals, EDDs, DMVs, CHP field offices, those sorts of things. We don't have an exhaustive record of all of the potential real property improvements and encumbrances that might exist there. And so, you might have a piece of property that would be really great, but there's, a bunch of utility easements that run through it already that would be, very difficult to undo. Or, it was escheated to the state 200 years ago, 150 years ago, and it's got a very specific, limited use to it, or statute governs what the possible uses of that particular parcel are. And so there's definitely some of that to still work through in the future. And then, of course, I mentioned, SPI doesn't have all the data, and so there are still potentially properties out there. I know there are properties out there that, we could add to this mix. I would also be remiss to say that, we certainly have not talked to these departments. And so there would need to be, those more robust conversations in the future as well. And of course, as I mentioned, we benefit from really dialing the criteria a little bit. But I think as an initial step to kind of showcase the potential power of state property to advance this goal, there's a tremendous amount of alignment. Because SPI is so functional, we have the ability to do a lot with it and come up with some really great results. I think there'll be, it can be easily public, easily shareable. We've done that for other efforts, including the executive order on affordable housing and executive order on emergency homeless shelters. And so SPI is a really powerful tool. And we're looking forward to continue to collaborating with our partners at CDT, Caltrans, PUC, others, to really get some refined criteria and dial in, I think, the ultimate property search. So that was a lot, and I know I talked really fast, so I'm going to pause and see if there's questions.
All right, thank you, Jason. I see a hand raised by Sunny.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jason. A great presentation. I will also commend HCD and Josh. I really appreciate the positive attitude of all the state agencies figuring out exactly, all that can be done and going the extra step here. My question, Jason, is so the identification of properties that you are doing
Mhm.
actually can be pretty strategic for both middle and last mile deployment. How is that work that you're doing going to get fed into a mapping exercise that is available for the project proponents, public, private, ISPs that are going to apply for dollars? What do you anticipate is going to be that process?
I want to make sure and see if Scott wants to opine a little bit on it, because I think there's a part of this in which we'll produce something, but kind of what happens after it's produced is a little outside of my particular purview. But for us, and kind of in keeping what we've done on previous executive order efforts, I think the ideal goal is, number one, criteria gets really dialed in, and we do the property search. At the end of that, we have a list of potential properties that meet said criteria. And then there are conversations that happen with those jurisdictional departments where we go back and we make sure there are no escheatments, that there are no encumbrances that would preclude development, those sorts of things. And we would come up with then sort of the property that, based on that development model, based on the criteria, based on departmental needs, it's available. That property subset would be able to be put in a GIS enabled database, very similar again to what we've done for affordable housing properties. It would be, again, a specific subset, and that would be able to be made public. There are a few state properties that are truly confidential. Think sensitive infrastructure, daycare facilities, things like that, we might need to keep confidential for this purpose. But for the most part, I think the properties that we're talking about would be able to be put in a specific GIS enabled database that's fully searchable, that made publicly available for ISPs and others to come in and look at and inquire about.
Okay, may I ask if Scott, you're going to comment, and then I have one more comment back to Jason.
Absolutely, Sunny, and thanks for the question. So, is Jason had indicated, this is a fairly elaborate process that we're going through to identify these locations and to continue to hone criteria. Given the urgency, we did utilize the initial middle mile locations suggested by PUC that were used as the sort of a guidepost for the public comment process on the middle mile locations, so that to the extent that the public process informs and changes those, that would be, a layer or lens that these would have to look through. As you mentioned, there's potential utility for these properties, both on the middle mile, but also the last mile. So as Jason indicated, honing the criteria, the initial suggested one was 5 miles from state roadways. And so what we've been talking with Jason and Department of General Services is, for last mile, would we need to further refine that criteria to say a half mile from state roadways? So there's that piece. So, there's getting to a state of doneness or acceptable doneness on this, but it is our full intention to utilize the information here and fold that into data and mapping efforts on the middle mile, but also the data and mapping efforts that are ordered through the action plan. And so, given that our office is working with those parties, we are going to be the connective tissue to make sure that this information is folded in to both and all efforts.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. And I truly appreciate the process that has to be both iterative and interagency. I do, have some insight, having had responsibility for a number of very large state agents or state departments in an agency. And forgive me, Jason, if you actually said it and I just didn't hear it, but I want to flag 3 opportunities, 2 that are particularly good and important for middle mile, a third that I think can be community hubs for last mile. And so the first is rest stops that are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation. I know all the complexities that go with sorting out state money from the federal money, blah, blah, blah. And what we've never done, although we were really trying to make a great push for, is the rest stops to be totally green in every way possible in terms of energy. But those can be huge hubs, particularly when we're looking at signals. Let me say I-5 is a good example into ag. So I'm just to Lori and the State Transportation Agency and our friends at Caltrans, Elizabeth, I'm back on the rest stop issue for important communications and demonstration of energy efficiency. The second is highway patrol way stations. Again, you can put a lot of equipment on that site, and co-location of equipment as well as towers there can make a huge amount of difference. Those are two critical potential, valuable middle mile links, and we can generate revenue off of them. And the third, for last mile folks, is actually the DMV offices. There are 90 very large ones, and usually quite useful properties that also need to be redone at some point. But anyway, I want to flag those. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny, for that. Always great advice as usual. Wanted to see if any other council members have questions or comment for Jason. Okay, I'm seeing none. Jason, just I want to echo the appreciation on this information that you presented. I do want to maybe pile on a little bit that I know you have been working closely with Caltrans, Cpuc, and CDT under leadership with Scott. I'm a big fan of using visualization as much as possible to not only to display what the potential, but using the GIS capability to identifying as a layer approach to focus and narrow down to what are the real location that is going to be really, really possible for doing a lot of these. So really glad to hear that the state property inventory database will be add-on having this additional GIS capability. So looking forward to a lot more development on this, because this is going to be a very useful tool for both middle and last mile.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. William.
No, it's Michael Flores.
Oh.
I had raised my hand, but I guess you didn't see it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No problem at all. I had a question with respect to Jason. I loved your presentation as well as everybody else. I echo Ms. McPeak's sentiments about the presentations thus far. But to what extent has DGS looked at the fare system?
Yeah,
I believe that we meet, quite a few of the criteria there, and they're sitting there, with the need for broadband. So I didn't know if they were included in the if you took a look at them or not, or.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
And to Ms. McPeak's comment earlier, the CHPs, DMVs, there are other departments who have communication towers as well. Some in very, very rural areas as well, that co-location is possible, that we have historically done that with. In fact, I've got a program in my shop who that's literally part of what they do, is telecom leasing. And so, yes, it's absolutely fairground sites, another great potential opportunity, especially with the vast parking lots. All of those properties would be included in SPI. The rest stops, not so much. That's part where we bring Caltrans in, obviously, as a partner. But that kind of goes back to sort of, what is and isn't an SPI. But I don't think any of that's certainly off the table. But fairgrounds, absolutely. In fact, the fairgrounds would be represented in that map to the right.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Williams.
Yeah, just wanted to share my appreciation for the presentation and also the suggestions that have been talked about. Obviously, really thinking through not only efficiencies and creativity is always important, but I also want to add that voice of equity and thinking through where these are located, who the owners of properties might be in terms of investigating where we finally place something. I know that's a big issue for Mr. Gibson, so we'll be watching this, and where we can be of assistance, please let us know.
All right. With that, thank you. Scott, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's get going. Thank you so much, Jason and DGS and all the partners working on that. So the next we'll give brief updates on action items 14, 16, 18, and 24. Next slide, please. So action plan item number 14 is to promote existing contractual vehicles and internet with internet service providers and equipment vendors to support cost savings and efficient purchasing of broadband services and equipment by local public entities, and then leveraging existing contracts as a resource efficient strategy to help other public entities acquire affordable broadband service, especially in bulk. Next slide. So on this piece, I know it was reported out, the CDT had helped out a lot in pandemic response for some of the agencies, particularly the Department of Education, to help purchase and acquire equipment for students for remote education. We had heard in the first council meeting this year about the Rural Broadband Connectivity Program, which was a joint effort by the Department of Technology and the state parks to create a system by which last mile providers could provide connectivity to state parks. So that's an example of an accomplishment for this year. In terms of next year, we have reestablished a working group with the Department of Technology and General Services and other partners, given that there are going to be so many opportunities around or potential opportunities around contracting and procurement. And wanted to give you a brief example that something we've been looking into over the last several weeks is that Housing and Community Development, their director has made it a priority to increase or provide broadband services to migrant worker centers. So they have provided us with an outstanding map and other location data so that we can work with our CalNet team to see if there's ways we can augment existing service or provide service to locations where there currently is none. As we've been talking about mapping, that data is also going to be folded into the overall state broadband mapping conversation as well. Next slide. On broadband action plan item number 16, partner with internet service providers to promote, track, publicly report the progress of adoption of affordable internet services and devices throughout the state. Next effort, CDT is not leading this effort. We know that some of our other partners, CDT, the California Emerging Technology Fund and the Department of Education have been doing this. For 2022, we intend to, in the next month or so, announce that we've hired a statewide initiatives manager, statewide broadband initiative manager, to really dive into this, to engage providers and then track a lot of this information on the Broadband for All portal. Next slide. Broadband action plan item number 18. As you can see, this is it's a big list that requires developing and managing a multi-layer network of digital inclusion stakeholders to discuss ongoing needs and share resources and coordinate initiatives, leverage the Broadband Council and GoBiz broadband funding initiative to strengthen partnerships among anchor institutions, including schools, libraries, workforce development boards, and social service departments, convening local government broadband coordinators and managers quarterly to identify barriers to programming, new actions to be undertaken and tools developed at the local level, convene private and nonprofit sector companies to understand and predict current and future demand for broadband. And then the last is convene broadband adoption practitioners, including libraries, nonprofits, and others semi-annually to share best practice and ongoing community needs in regards to innovation, creating new digital literacy tools, developing curriculum and training to meet the needs of the workforce, community, and students. Next slide. So on this one, key accomplishments is that we've done an extensive amount of work with GoBiz on both their identification of funding and on their community readiness survey with local cities, counties, and regions. Really, both of those efforts has allowed us to identify needs, resources, toolkits, and creating content that would ultimately go on the Broadband for All portal. For example, there's a collaboration with the regional consortia, CETF and Valley Vision, and local governments and tribes to create a checklist and a guide for locals looking to create their own broadband. And then the web portal obviously is going to be a place to showcase these artifacts and other information gathered. As I mentioned, as we increase staff over the next month, our plan is to strategize for more rapid implementation on this action item. Next slide. And finally is action item number 24, which is to request that executive branch entities and constitutional agencies incorporate broadband into their strategic plans, provide broadband priorities to the Broadband Council annually to ensure effective interagency collaboration. Next slide. While a lot of that is already being done here at the Broadband Council and now on the Middle Mile effort, the Broadband office will be contacting entities and offices in November, December timeframe, sending a letter with an email and an online form for each entity and office to populate, with a number of, different catches for us or different columns to capture information about how are they integrating, what are barriers, who are they partnering with, what additional needs are there, and then we intend to report out to the Broadband Council in the first quarter meeting of next year. And that is it for my updates.
All right, thank you, Scott. Want to open up the council member for question comments? Yes, Sunny. You're up.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair Tong. I do want to compliment Scott and your team on the commitment to focus on the adoption and to get to the digital literacy. I know it takes a while, but this is really important. I just wanted to sort of share the trajectory in California of households signing up for the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, EBB. California remains the state with the most signups at the FCC. It's Universal Services Administration Corporation, USAC. That's the good news. Sort of the bad news is nationwide, it's a little over 7 million households only. In California, it's a little over 700. I think we're approaching 710,000 households. The FCC has actually been, I think, very good in trying to get data out on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. They're giving us more insights to where by a census tract zip code the signups are. But to really get our fair share out of EBB, we should be at 2 million. And that is not where we're at. We are about 37% towards that goal. We're really promoting EBB. More counties are looking at distribution to CalFresh. More school districts are looking at distribution of the information to tell the actual household, customer, student, and parent, here's how you sign up. And so I just want to say to all our state agency colleagues, if you can get that word out to your counterparts at the local level where they are interacting with the actual customer who's low income, it is urgent. The reason it becomes really important is, although based on current expenditures, we think EBB might last through February, maybe going into March. It was only 3.2 billion nationwide. The good news is that once you're registered, you're known as qualifying for the benefit to USAC, and it is confidential. But then there is a, if you will, successor program that is sitting in the infrastructure bill. It's called the Affordability Connectivity Program. I think that's it. And although the subsidy moves from $50 a month down to $30, it's still a pretty substantial subsidy. And therefore, and that's a $14.2 billion appropriation, which means we have a really running start to ensure we get all low-income households affordable broadband and in a database. We have to really, really focus on this, I think, in California to get our fair share. Then what we would have, as has been reported by, I think, Michael Minkus today, is the Lifeline program in California becomes an additional, if you will, safety net. All of this is really important, and I will close by saying the vast majority of the signups for EBB in California have simply been the transfer of existing customers on affordable offers over to EBB, not new people. And they're mostly mobile, not at home, if you will, wired home subscription EBB. We have a long ways to go, and that is even with California doing better than any other state.
That is very, very insightful. I do want to provide a comment and perhaps some idea to work with Scott and team, especially I'm seeing their advisory member, Stuart and Ann are here. I think maybe take a page out of the, vaccine rollout where, lots of approach and outreach, I should say, was very, very, like literally delivered to somebody's doorstep for those individuals who traditionally would not be seeking or would find out about such offering through, the typical channel, like, website or things like that. I think we, the timing, what you mentioned, Sunny, it's relevant because we are coming to end of the calendar year. And as, hopefully a lot of the family are starting to look at the light at the end of the tunnel as we coming out of the pandemic, that there will be more focus on how do they maintain the connectivity or sign up for the connectivity with this offering to them. But it's how we as a state can really make sure this information is being provided to them. I don't want to take up too much time, but I think this is, I'm glad you flagged that. Just because we're ahead with the rest of the state doesn't mean we have done enough. And we should do more. And I do have some ideas. So are there any questions or comment from other members? Yes, Dr. Williams.
Just want to take up where you and Sunny left off with the emphasis. And I really like the example that you used in the vaccine rollout, because I think it's just that important, number one, and it's also just that difficult. We've been saying this since the 90s that the internet is just, it's a utility, right? Period, right? In the philosophical sense of it. But it should be treated like that. Everybody should have access. That's why affordability is important. Again, public housing is important, all of the rest. But our biggest problem, I think, in the 64th Assembly District, we actually did several things in the vaccine rollout that there was no precedent for it. So as an example, and many health organizations were doing this, but not, hey, elected assembly member, I want you to go door to door with volunteers not only to educate folks, but if you want to get the vaccine today, I'm here. And we did that in Watts and Wilmington because they had the highest rate of unvaccinated. And you know how this is, I'm dating myself, but this is we used to have that conversation in public about the book Freakonomics, right? The things that you see are not really the things that you see. So what if, and this is how we started this process, right? 300 volunteers, we were walking the streets in Wilmington and Watts, the members out there. So he's drawing a crowd and we're going, we got like, we're split into neighborhoods, but we got like 50 people walking the sidewalk. So everybody opens the doors like, what are these people doing, right? But, but we started the conversation because we were looking at the national data and the Cal OES data. They put out their piece every day on vaccine hesitancy. And we asked the question, well, what if vaccine hesitancy is really not what we think it is, right? Instead of some sort of ardent, particularly the African American community, instead of falling on, oh, well, it's a Tuskegee issue, which is an important issue. But in many cases, folks just couldn't afford it. And people are saying, oh, you can't afford to go to the park down the street? Yep, sure can't, because I work all the time. So when it comes to this issue, I think we have to really ask ourselves, probing, not obvious questions, and think through the outreach from that point of view, because, again, we're swimming in money, so money's not the problem. Something else is. So strategy, leadership, the proverbial cliche-ish thinking outside of the box, definitely want to support that. And again, if our office can do anything to assist in that, we'd be happy to.
Got it. Yeah, I think we're definitely going to follow up. I think it's almost like the ground approach to get the information out, because we can't rely on the website or the email because they don't have access to that to begin with. Sarah.
Yeah, so I just, from my perspective, I would say I'm a little bit more cautious about anything that's in a federal infrastructure bill right now. I don't want to count chickens before they're hatched, because my understanding is that the House and the Senate are going to have to go through a process of specifically the Democratic caucus is going to have to go through a process of cutting down those two bills into a much smaller package. And we don't yet know what is going to make that much smaller package. I'm hopeful we'll get more money, but we don't actually know. And I don't know if I share the opinion that money isn't an issue. I actually think money is quite a very big issue, particularly with adoption, because the need is so huge.
All right, thank you. Sunny?
You're on mute, Sunny.
Quickly, I do recognize Sarah is right. We really do respect that Congress member Clyburn has a big say in this. We're very pleased to see that Jessica Rosenworcel was appointed, or President Biden announced the intent to permanently to nominate her to be permanent FCC chair. So there's continuity, along with Gigi Sohn being added, and a good administrator at NTIA. So they're getting their team in place. I do think that there will be still strong support, not only from Congressmember Clyburn, but the National Urban League on the replacer program, even if they have to reduce the total number behind it and therefore cut the number of years they expect it to go. And I say that because it's important to continue to do the push for signups. And so I also want to join Dr. Williams in saying, Amy, thanks so much for the suggestion on really the all-out effort, and then drilling down in communities to figure out what the real issue is, door to door, as Angela said. And lastly, I should have reported, as I'm reminded by our VP Susan Walters, that in California, only Cox is actually making the benefit of EBB of a device available. So no one's really advertising it except CETF, and we're small potatoes. We do advertise about EBB mostly in the LA market, and no other ISP except Cox is telling residents they can get a device, a good device with the subsidy from EBB. So all of that needs to be put into the big push from the state.
Yeah, hey, and thanks everyone. And Sunny, just wanted to also clarify one point, and that you've been doing great work, UNCTF, on EBB outreach, and you know, some of our partners that are members of the Broadband Council have as well. So the Department of Education has you know, had, I believe, multiple webinars and is communicated out to their you know, local county offices about the availability of EBB and provided them with information. The state libraries has done the same. So there is additional effort being done, including CPUC. So it's a I think it underscores the challenge that adoption is something we need to continue to stay focused on. And with the extensive amount of funding that's been allocated towards infrastructure, I think collectively we need to keep a placeholder that funds are needed to do the heavy lifting and the granular, sometimes analog and grassroots outreach on these programs.
Yeah, Scott, I want to quickly make sure Dr. William has the last word on this, and then we can keep moving to I know there's additional items, and I want to make sure we have 30 minutes allotted for public comment. Dr. William, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I agree, Sarah, particularly at the federal level. You're right. Just with what's happening around the politics of the infrastructure bill, it's more than money, which always for California means that we just have to do what we can with the resources that we have. And we've got a lot of resources. But I will say this. I've been around here a while, and every time we get a surplus, every time we get a huge amount of money in California, the people that need to get served don't get served. And I don't say that to point fingers. I say that to say, well, we probably should try to think about this differently. And I think there's so many entities that are really invested, right? So for instance, the ISPs have great affordability programs, but part of the issue is that they're not reaching, at the end of the day, that sector that we're desperately trying to get to. So, and Amy, your point around, it's one of those like, so it's a true paradox or conundrum, whatever you want to call it. On the one hand, the folks that get this, that need the service, probably don't have the service. Right? I'll tell you one quick, just an example. During COVID, we were desperately doing outreach to the members of the constituents in the 64th Assembly District. And, you know, we didn't even have Zoom yet. So we got Zoom and we were excited and we sent it out and we said, hey, you know, if you don't have a computer, use your phone. If you don't have a phone, right, a cell phone, use your rotary, right, call in. So we're on the call, and the majority of people in the 64th Assembly District who responded, 55 and older, they've got rotary phones, and they called in. There's no mute button on a rotary phone. And so when we first, because again, you know, when you're in the heat of it, you're like, everybody mute your phone, please, you know, a desperate plea to have some order. And then, right, on our staff level call, we're talking to one another. What's happening? Can we mute? Da, da, da. And we oh my God. And so then we make apologies. Say, you know what? We understand that many folks are on. Please try to control the noise as best as possible. That was like a duh for us, right? Like we didn't think through, these are our actual constituents. This is what they actually have as opposed to what we think they have. And that to me means something, not only for the 64th Assembly District and urban areas and Black and brown areas and low income communities, but the whole state. So I think we have to spend some time. And again, I'm not suggesting anything that we're not doing or that I won't be a part of or to help and assist. We just need to think thoroughly around how are we getting to people? and you know what I want to say, but that's the key point that we can't let go. Because if we let it go, we'll be back here another year later saying we spent oodles of money, and people are still, the people that we want desperately connected and who want to be connected won't be.
Well said. All right, I'm hearing an action item from this, perhaps a fast follow. Dr. Williams, sounds like you have volunteered yourself to be part of it. Let's take offline to talk about a method. As you know, I was privileged enough to be part of the vaccine rollout during the pandemic response. There are definitely a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of those tools or channels that have established. Let's leverage those. Let's get this information out to folks, and then in a way that they perhaps may not have received, despite the great effort by many of the entities, as Scott mentioned. Okay, all right, we'll do a fast follow on this one. Thank you. Scott, let's keep this moving.
Yep, next up is GoBiz on their action item. Kaina?
Thank you, Director Tong. Thank you, Scott. Kaina Pereira, Senior Advisor for Business Development at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And we are reporting on action item number 23. So form a planning group of all state agencies that oversee any potential infrastructure and broadband adoption funding to meet quarterly to ensure alignment in funding goals and implementation, and further identify existing and new programs that can support broadband for all. I believe that this last conversation we just have is imperative to inclusion into this update. So I look forward to conversing with Dr. Williams and the other members of the panel to be able to implement this item successfully in Q1 of 2022. We are in the planning stages and have been developing action item number 2, which feeds directly into this, which is the identification of alternative funding sources through federal, state, and philanthropic option, and thereby tying those funding mechanisms to local jurisdiction projects and opportunities. We'll be working with all the members here on developing that information and reporting it out on a regular cadence once the infrastructure and the website developed by CDT is available. At the current time, we are accepting and have disseminated this information out to a few participants. If you would like to receive this list and this spreadsheet of available funding sources, you can email myself. It's Kaina Pereira at gobiz.ca.gov. We'll have somebody send out my information to everybody on the team. In addition, we are working with the Cpuc and all of our partner agencies on standing up this first meeting, probably in the Q1 of 2022 period. You should be expecting communication, and I believe that our communication now needs to be a little bit more robust to include Vaccinate 58 and the census related information. So I look forward to meeting with Director Tong on providing some of that information out to this group. As we know, there are a number of participants, both on the state and federal side, that we need to have inclusion, and rolling programs will be established and created during this long-term effort. So the construction of this panel or this group of advisors will change over time. From that, we have determined that these actions may intend or have some intentionality around them, and as such, we may need to include some program specialists during that time. Currently, we are building out our infrastructure internally at the GoBiz side to be able to manage both this effort as well as long-term permit streamlining efforts that we've talked about with CETF and a number of the other participants here. And we'll be rolling out some guidance around that through the web portal as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaina, for that. And GoBiz has always been on top of this action item on the action plan. So really appreciate the effort. Question or comments? All right, seeing none. Let's move to the next item. Thank you, Kaina.
All right, next item, I'd like to invite my colleague Mark Monroe to give a very quick update on the Middle Mile Initiative.
Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping everybody can hear me now. Apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. Yeah, real quick, we have, in terms of the Middle Mile approach, we have, we're into the introductory, we've really completed the introductory phase integration. We have agreements signed with Caltrans, PUC, and the TPA, and we've begun holding the advisory committee meetings as required by SB 156. We have the PUC, TPA, and Caltrans are working together on the data and mapping effort. And similarly, the design and engineering teams are working together with the TPA to get the specs to Caltrans so they can get started with construction. And then we're also working with the TPA in developing business and economic models and an operating budget to see what this looks like going forward on a long-term basis. And then we also have an effort to identify some phase 1 locations that are that will provide immediate connectivity. And so and hoping to learn from those in addition to, and then while we're continuing to move to identify broader lists of projects for moving forward. And then in terms of the kind of the phase 1 plan, we're working with PUC to get initial staff assessment as well as a broader assessment in the next few months, and as they build in their public comments received as part of their proceedings.
All right. I know it's Sunny have a quick raised her hand for question, but before we go there, Sunny, I wanted to, because earlier we were trying to give an opportunity for Mark to introduce himself, and due to the technical difficulty, I might add, it was not broadband related. It was actually equipment related. We couldn't hear us, and we were like staring at each other only visually. But Mark, can you just give a very brief self intro to this group of Broadband Council members?
Absolutely. Yeah, I apologize. So, you know, I think I know a lot of you from the last 21 years. I've been at finance and I worked in a variety of policy areas, including transportation and utilities. And so this last spring, when we were looking for new creative ways to solve for statewide broadband and the broadband for all, we looked at the development of this kind of state-run open access middle mile. And so that was kind of the genesis of this component. And so we've SB 156 enacted that, and with a big help from a range of folks, certainly CDT, PUC, finance, the governor's office, the governor himself putting his shoulder behind this. But yeah, so now I'm over at CDT, and we're here to get this thing built.
Thank you, Mark. It's your much welcome partner to Scott, who has been carrying double duty, and it's been an amazing job. So glad you're coming on board. All right, Sunny, and then followed by Sarah.
Thank you, Amy. Hey, Mark, I think I remember fondly or not so fondly you turning me down on a couple of budget requests at finance. Hey, I want to welcome. Well, yes, welcome heartily. Phase 1 locations. What's the process of getting to those and the timing? I mean, I've been asked a lot about criteria about that.
Well, in addition to the criteria from SB 156, the idea is, can we identify right now where they would provide connectivity when they're done? And so this requires obviously some sort of plan for last mile that is forthcoming, as well as an identified link to either existing middle mile or the backhaul. So that's really the criteria, and knowing that we're going to, the phase 1 is really a demonstration to show that this works. So it's we're trying to finalize a list in the next week or two here, and then we're going to continue building the rest. Right? It's not like we're just going to stop and focus on phase 1. So I think that's important as we look at areas. We're just trying to identify ones where we're going to get that connectivity sooner to show that this works.
All right, and I would also add that lots of that is based on the public comment proceeding, process that CPUC is running. So I think to add to Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, because I also chair the Middle Mile Action Advisory Committee, that the phase 1 is really for the purpose of demonstrating, hey, is this the right track? Is this the right thinking? By no means it's the the definitive approach for the rest of the locations.
Right. And as I mentioned earlier, in the coming next few months, we hope to have a much broader assessment, a staff analysis of where we need to move forward.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little bit confused because my understanding is SB 156 said PUC, you go identify places, transmit that to CDT. So it seems like I get there's this desire for early wins, but my understanding, at least from the third party administrator who talked about this a little bit with senators, is that that's really looking at leasing opportunities, not for build out. And so I'm just a little bit confused about why we're not focusing on using those monies to build out to places that are recommended by the CPUC first.
Well, sure. So a couple things. I think when the initial assessment was done, I think it was the estimate if we were to build all 8,000 miles was it was close to $4 billion. And so, as we all know, SB 156 didn't provide that much. So there is something that as we move forward with this project, we have to understand that depending on how much it ends up costing to build, then it's likely that there's some points that we're going to have to lease. So just to kind of be aware that and by lease, I think we're usually thinking of IRUs, but that's something that we're still kind of trying to envision in terms of the PUC. And we're not getting ahead of PUC in any way. They've gone through their public process, and staff are that's one of the things that we're still working on here in terms of identifying what the phase 1 projects are. Is just clarifying that they are based on PUC's initial recommendations at the staff level in terms of location.
So, I mean, I get when you say immediate availability, I guess I'm having trouble because I think what the legislature is expecting here is that there's going to be a map that will show them where this middle mile is going to get built. And if there's a difference between leasing access to middle mile that already exists versus building out new state-owned property, we expect to see a delineation and kind of an expectation of when those things are going to be complete. So I'm just if you're talking about aligning things with last mile, isn't it going to, is this last mile that's already under construction, things like that. And I'm also, if the PUC wants to respond, I'd be welcome to that as well.
Sure, and I'm happy to have them, chime in there. I mean, when we talk about phase 1, we're really looking at a limited set of projects. This is not, they're really just the quick wins that we wanted. So I think we envision most of them, being builds. We're looking for some alternatives to try the proof of concept, but we're really looking at some early builds where clearly there is, communities have been identified that are unserved or underserved, and there's been some level of, and then the PUC has been able to identify in this case where what that we'll call it the last mile and the first mile connections will be.
I can chime in a little bit, and then Dr. William will make sure we.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask: does the PUC want to chime in here? Because that was one of the things that it sounded like the PUC may have some input as well before we move on to other people.
I would love to hear the PUC chime in.
I don't have yeah, sorry, just takes a minute to get off mute. I don't have anything to add at this time, but I'm glad to follow up.
Yeah, and I think specific on that, I like to chime in a little bit because I'm also, intimately involved because I also chair the Middle Mile Advisory Committee, where the idea of having a pilot, or I should say phase 1 location, I think, Sarah, the immediate reference doesn't mean that you're identifying in the next state, the connection is there, which implies that is that already there. It's just a matter of, lining it up and or stuff like that. It's the immediacy to it is not really in that short of time frame. But I think the quick win reference is that, first of all, the purpose of doing these phase 1 locations is really to identifying, probably just a handful. We don't even know where yet. I mean, how many yet, but is really working closely with CPUC through the public process to identify what are some good candidates that it's a good demonstration effort to allow the state, and I'm using this royal state, to learn what is the best way to get connectivity into the hands of our residents. And at the end of the day, like building the middle mile in collaboration with the last mile effort that CPUC leading, all of these is for the purpose of providing that connectivity. And yes, build, it's what it's being referenced or projected through the legislation. And then there's also the option to look for, are there alternatives to build if some of these are, hard to reach area, et cetera, et cetera. And without, spending time only to analyzing that, is in addition to analyzing that, identifying a few, I would say, phase 1 location as a demonstration effort is allowing us to go through that learning and the iteration as more definitive approach can be finalized through more staff analysis. That's really the intention of the phase 1 location.
So, I mean, I hear that. I just want to add a note of caution here that the legislature was pretty clear that they expected, we understood that there would be leasing and build. So I guess I'm still concerned that it's not really clear what these things are, what the demonstration projects are. I'm hearing connectivity, is it lease or is it build?
And Sarah, and all I'm trying to convey is that in the middle mile initiatives effort, that recommendation is not there yet. And I think the staff is trying to be very open. And as we're openly discussing, hey, this is the approach that we're taking to have the location identifying. Once the location is there, there's probably going to be further analysis and conversation with all of the members involved and the stakeholder involved to see on the how, right? And I just don't want to get ahead of all of that research work that's happening right now, and it's certainly not at this particular juncture, even because the idea of taking this approach was only being presented to the advisory committee of the middle mile last Wednesday. They just happened to met a week prior to the Broadband Council, and it's not until next month that more information will be coming. So that's all. I'm also just be upfront that I think the state's trying to be open about sharing an approach, but by no means anything definitive is decided.
Okay, I will finally say, like, we have a very short time frame to use this money. And one of the great concerns from the legislature is these dollars going unspent, when this is one of the times I think I'll chime in and say, this is one of the areas where I agree with Angelo and say, as long as we got the funds, we got to use them.
Yep. Agree that we all felt a sense of urgency. Gotta keep this moving. Don't overanalyze it. Again, I don't want people to take away that the reference of quick win is automatically equivalent to lease and not build. I don't think that's the correct understanding, but I think at the end of the day, it's trying to see the best way to make the investment now that are best for our future growth moving forward. Thank you, Sarah. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Just wanted to say thank you to Sarah because she asked all the questions that my boss, Mr. Kisson, is going to ask me. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate also your responses, even if we get responses later. It's an odd kind of thing. This entire process, I don't know, maybe this is, it can be, it can be approached from an inductive or a deductive point of view, right? And a particular approach where we either go from, right, a clear hypothesis, right, a certain clarity and down to the data, or observation down to the data. And I think what the legislature is saying is that we've got the legislature as a hypothesis, meaning they have a clear sense of what they want to see at the end of the road. And the closer we can get to that map, the closer we can get to that kind of tactility for them is going to be really important, because that's what, again, that's what they're going to push us to answer for them. So we need your help. At least I'll say I will. Sarah needs nobody's help. I need your help. Because when Mr. Gibson asked me that question, I want to be able to say, look, this is what we know for sure. That is, again, in parallel to your and your colleagues' vision. And this is how they're implementing from that vision. I also finally just wanted to say congratulations to Mark. I really appreciate you taking the helm of this middle mile piece, mainly because in my brief interactions with you and our assembly fellow, you are a kind human being. You really, I'll just tell you this because you don't know it, but it's been transmitted to me from our fellow. You know, she was, of course, a fellow's going to be, you know, kind of trepidatious to talk to the person, right, who's in charge of this or that. But you really did, again, you treated her as I'm sure you do everyone with regard, right? Regardless, right, of their status or who they are. And I think that's just a key quality that we need in public service. So I just wanted to commend you on that and welcome you into that position. And of course, anything our office can do to support your efforts, we will.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to the continued partnership with the legislature and the administration and the PUC in getting this done.
Right. Thank you. Any other question or comments from the council member before we move to other topics? I'm just doing a time check. I know this normally schedule is a 2-hour, but I do not know how many public comments will be made today. I want to make sure we give ample time to the public to do so. And I know there's a couple more items we're gonna pass through. So we might run over noon today. And I don't know if that schedule will be amenable to the council member, but if you do need to, you know, take a bio break, I'll just say it, because we've been here for almost 2 hours, feel free to do so, but I want to make sure we maintain the time that is slotted for the public comment, even though there's a lot to go through for the remaining. So, okay, with that, Scott, let's move to the next item.
Sorry, the next mile is, or the next item is a last mile funding programs update from the PUC.
Hi, thanks, Scott. Again, I'm Michael Minkus. I spoke earlier. I'm a policy advisor to the director of the communications division at the California Public Utilities Commission. And I don't have slides for this item, but I will provide a brief update on the CPUC's implementation of broadband last mile programs and funding. The broadband budget package and a number of policy bills created, funded, reformed, and revitalized a number of last mile broadband programs. Summarily, the last mile programs fall into 4 main areas: technical assistance, a loan loss reserve fund, the last mile program or federal funding account, and the California Advanced Services Fund broadband grant program and its many component parts. Each of the programs is being implemented in a proceeding at the CPUC, and I'll provide a brief snapshot. The programs are in 2 main proceedings or dockets. The first is the California Advanced Services Fund, led by Commissioner Cpuc. It will implement the technical assistance, the loan loss reserve, and the California Advanced Services Fund broadband grant programs. On timing for technical assistance, a staff proposal was issued in September, and the CPUC in a scoping memo targeted a proposed decision with a set of rules on or before December 1st, 2020. For the loan loss reserve fund, a staff proposal is targeted for the first quarter of 2022. In the public housing consortia, adoption and infrastructure grant programs will be implemented in the next year. Finally, the last mile or federal funding account program will be implemented in the broadband deployment proceeding led by Commissioner Martha Guzman Aceves. A staff proposal is out for comment now, and a proposed decision is targeted for December 2021 to March 2022. So that's the conclusion of my CPUC last mile programs update.
All right, thank you, Michael. Question or comments? All right, I'm hearing none. Let's keep going, Scott.
All right, the next item is a very brief legislative update. John Mann, the Department of Technology's Deputy Director of Legislation, and also Grant Mack from the CPUC. John?
Hey, folks, nice to see everybody. To be brief, Grant and I are obviously available to do any pertinent follow-up on the different bills that were signed by the governor this year. Run through several of them quickly that have most impact on the work we're doing. We have AB 14 by Assemblymember Aguiar Curry related to California Advanced Services Fund. AB 41 related to broadband infrastructure deployment and requiring CPUC to update broadband maps. SB 4 by Senator Gonzalez related to California Advanced Services Fund again, and increasing and extending that fund through 2032. And we have SB 28 by Senator Caballero, which again impacts the Digital Infrastructure Video Competition Act of 2006 related to data and collection of data on providers. And then obviously we have the historic SB 156 investment, the budget bill for middle mile and for that build out, and the 3.25 billion to do so. So again, Grant and I are available for any specific follow-ups from folks here at the meeting, and happy to field any questions.
All right, thank you, John. Question or comments? Okay, I'm hearing none. All right, let's keep moving.
Got it. So really the next portion was intended to engage the council members on the 2022 meetings dates and then the focus and specifically, you know, referencing that 2020 was about the executive order and the creation of the broadband action plan, that 2021 was focused on getting the executive order and action plan items up and running. And so staff wanted to start with the recommendation and then open it up to members for their discussion and decision. Our recommendation on, you know, a suggested focus for the Broadband Council for next year would be fine-tuning any executive order or action plan items that need to be addressed. Second, getting estimated dates for completion on short-term items and providing that direction to the entities in charge of those items. And then lastly, is really getting a high-level game plan from responsible parties with milestone dates included for long-term action item plans. So that's really 3 recommendations of refining the executive order and action plan items, estimated dates for short-term action items, and then high-level game plans and milestones for the long-term items. I mean, really just love to open it up for discussion and guidance from the council members. Amy.
All right, I think this is a recommendation. I wanted to take a quick pulse from the council member. Scott, what I'm hearing is giving the amount of updates that are provided, and I mean needing to provide, as well as there's a lot of moving parts, you know, in especially the middle mile, which even though that has its own dedicated advisory committee, when it comes to broadband for all is really part of it. That's why this particular kind of broadband council should definitely get updated as well. So moving it to a quarterly cadence, Scott, is to ask, right?
Well, yes, definitely quarterly cadence is a recommendation, but also the focus of next year's plan, because the Broadband Council, is the body that created the action plan collectively. There is a need. We've already begun mapping out the executive order and the action plan items, but there needs to be potentially another lens on how the legislation that John had mentioned potentially impacts, or does it change, a particular approach or owner of those items. But then specifically, given the urgency of all this, we've seen the interdependency and interconnectedness, potentially with data and mapping, identification of properties, permitting, is that, we need to determine a level of done and identify a due date for that to be done, so that all of these efforts can be leveraged to support the overall goal, which is broadband for all.
Yep. Sunny.
I just want to commend you as chair for the leadership this last year in getting us to this kind of discipline and regular reporting. I totally support Scott's approach and appreciate, Scott, you setting forth a framework for us to either support or modify and refine. I think it is excellent. You'll continue to improve upon it. I like the cadence proposal. So it's really the whole approach of having the executive order, the action plan, continuing to revisit it, do exactly what Scott just said, what is done, and then the accountability for it, but at a regular pace, so that we can be diligent about assuring we get it done.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that same appreciation, not only for your team, but also all of the council members and those that, in fact, at least in my situation that I stand in for. I like, and that's a great word, the discipline of let us continue, right, going through the executive order. Let us continue to refine and define, and I like that. So I would agree with that. The only thing I'd like to see is some, and I don't know if we can do this in a larger form. I would love to know and to have a discussion about, and I know California is a leader in this, but where it's being implemented elsewhere. What can we learn, right, from other entities, state, private, public, that can enhance our thinking and strategy to make broadband for all, the promise of it, a reality? Because I think and again, another last commendation, the speed by which the executive order came out, and then the report that is so aptly memorialized for Assemblymember Moore. I just, again, it's one of those things that if you missed it, that's monumental. And it means a lot. It meant a lot to the California Legislative Black Caucus. It meant a lot to Mr. Gibson. You wedded something that hasn't been wedded before, at least my knowledge, right? Obviously the sense of urgency, but also the principled and valued, proposition of broadband for all, but also just recognizing the history of leaders in this fight. I just think that's remarkable. And so really doubling down, right? So yes, let us continue, but also let's figure out a way that we can bring in a public discussion, right? It's good to have study sessions and things that we connect with in working groups, but a public conversation about equity, right? Issues around really getting to what broadband for all promises, what it means, and how we can actually deliver it.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or feedback from the council member? So what I'd like to ask is, because this is the last meeting for this year, and what the staff recommendation is really charter our path for the next year, and perhaps this sets this type of cadence, as well as the, continue this pressing on this discipline and this rhythm that we have been seeing. And if nothing else, it needs to be even more tighter, even more broadened in terms of the conversation. And I really do want to echo Dr. Williams on your point of the equity lens and looking through all of this, because it's while there's a lot of work being done in the various action item, including the middle mile have its dedicated focus now due to the great support that we're getting. At the end of the day, what really matters is, did our resident have an improved experience? And are we helping in closing the digital divide? And where is that equity lens to making sure that really the unserved, and then the underserved are getting, much needed help through all of this. And I think that type of facilitated conversation issue mentioned is not only to me a good to have at this forum, but this forum should also really serve as that inspirational leadership, that inspirational driver, if you will, to continue to bring all of the players along in the state. Everybody might come from a different perspective, but at the end of the day, serving the residents of California to make sure that everybody have the access that they have as a necessity when it comes to broadband should be a common goal. And I think it's important to have this Broadband Council continue to serve as that role, that leadership role on behalf of California. So with that, I'd like to ask if there's a member of the council can present a motion to codify this decision of one, moving the cadence of this council gathering from 3 times to quarterly. Second, if there are an expectation for these meetings for the items that they wanted to cover, not to the agenda item, but the area, the broad approach, so that we can make sure that it's being documented as a decision moving forward.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion, further discussion needed? All right, and Jewel, before you take the vote, do you want to go ahead and reiterate the recommendation?
Sure. The recommendation was to meet quarterly with the focus of fine-tuning any executive order or action plan items that need to be addressed, getting estimated dates for completion of short-term items, and getting high-level game plan with milestone dates for the long-term items.
All right, so with that, let's take a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstain? All right, motion moved. Thank you. Scott, back to you.
All right, Amy, that concludes our official business. Next up is public comment.
All right. I want to be respectful of folks' time. I know we ran really, really long, but I think it's a very well discussion. What I like to do this is we're going to open it up to public, that if you'd like to speak, go ahead and have your hand raised, and our moderator is going to take note of the sequence and call, provide you the opportunity to speak. If the council member wanted to quickly take like a 2 to 3 minutes break, we'll come back, like if that's okay with everyone, because we'll be sitting here for 2 hours. We'll come right back at 12:05.
Amy?
Yes.
I have another meeting that I have to be at noon, so I just wanted to note that I'll need to leave, but I appreciate it. And if we'll follow up with my staff regarding public comment.
All right, thank you for letting us, no problem with that. And I do want to acknowledge that the other council member, Lori Pepper, was able to join. So thank you, Darcy, for letting us. So why don't we just take a quick break, and then any public member wants to go ahead and have your hand raised. We'll be back at 12:05.
People are free to chat while we're waiting.
Okay, I want to see if members are coming back. About a minute. It's 12:04 on my clock. Okay. It's 12:05. I hope everybody have a chance to take a quick break. I know it's been very, very long, but like I said, very well lively dialogue, which is outstanding. With that, Jules, do you want to once? Oh, I guess I'll say the public comment period is open, and Jules, if you want to go ahead and remind or walk through the procedure for public comment period.
Sure. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes per commenter, 1 commenter per entity, and should address the work discussed during the meeting. We will, if people, I'll call if there's anybody on the phone first, but just so the most frequent question we get is, will you post the video and the slides? And we will be doing that. We try to do that as soon as possible. So first, is there anybody on the phone who would like to speak? I don't think we had very many phone participants, so we'll loop back at the end. And Robert Say is first.
Hi, I'm Robert Seaman, Senior Policy Advisor for USDA Rural Development. And I thought this is relevant to, I think there was some reference to federal funding. If you haven't already seen it, I thought you'd like to know that Secretary Vilsack announced last week that we have the new Reconnect 3 broadband program, which will start accepting applications on November 24th for the next 90 days for $1.15 billion in loans and grants. Of significant to you is we have changed our definition of unserved to 100 Mbps down and 20 Mbps up, which is a shift from the old 10.1. So that more closely aligns to what is going on actually in other states. The fund to service level is 100 synchronous. So we have upped the standard as to what is to be funded. This program has $200 million for loans, $250 million for loan and grant combinations, $350 million in grants with a 25% matching requirement, but it has also $350 million in grants with no matching requirements for projects in tribal and socially vulnerable communities. This is significant for California because California has 109 of the 574 federally recognized tribes. It opens a door for California. And I was just checking this morning with the headquarters and to see whether or not these funds could also be used by tribes to help leverage their existing 2.5 gigahertz FCC spectrum awards. And the answer was, we think so. So there's some opportunities here to leverage things. I would say it also fits in potentially to leverage California's obviously last mile, but also middle mile efforts. So I will leave it at that. And I'll just let you know, there were 2 distance learning telemedicine grants announced last week for California, and I'll just leave it at that. So that's a different program.
All right, thank you, Robert. All right, Jill.
Larry Ortega.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Larry Ortega with Community Union. A couple of questions on the policy, maybe setting up a policy arm. It seems that there's a false presumption that pricing is fair right now. And I'm wondering if this council would take up the issue of discovering whether or not pricing is fair and start looking at it through maybe a subcommittee that they can look at, because that's a false presumption. As we know, prices in Europe and across the, other places in the globe are, fractions of what we're paying here. And I'm wondering if we could maybe start looking at that. The other policy question, and I'm not sure if, this could be a combination between community groups as well as members of this particular council, to start looking at, the dark fiber that's currently in the ground right now and how that's going to play a role in terms of the deployment aspect of middle mile as well as last mile, and how we could work to, from a policy standpoint, start accessing that dark fiber, start creating a policy in which we could access that dark fiber, or what's going to be done with it. So those are my two questions, and I'm wondering if perhaps this council could appoint someone to follow up, so that that we can actually do something, or decide that this council is not going to do anything. But pricing and dark fiber are two key issues that I think have not been addressed in any of the conversation over the last two meetings.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Ortega. What we would do is, after the public comment period, we will route back to the council member to see if there's any comments or deliberation they want to take action on. But I wouldn't say that right at the end of this meeting we will be able to give you a response, but certainly we'll follow up afterward, after we have a chance to discuss here. Thank you. Jules, are there any other public comments?
We're not seeing any other public comments. If somebody's having problems finding how to raise their hand on Zoom, please feel free to raise your hand physically. And I'd like to loop back to, again, to if there's anybody on the phone who would like to provide public comment. It does not appear that there is anybody else who would like to provide public comment.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and close the public comment, and coming back to the council member for probably a last sweep of any outstanding items. So if I could have all the council members, making sure I know that the Zoom moved so much, I couldn't tell who's still on, who's not on anymore. But if I want to make sure we still have a quorum to wrap up this meeting. So if you are on, please make sure I can see you. Just on that last comments, that also more of a request to the council member. I don't know if there's any comments or deliberation people wanted to talk about that. I'll open it up to council member now. Nobody? Sunny, come on! I always look at you. Really the request from Mr. Ortega, it's really about is this council the right entity or have interest to look into from a pricing fairness, as well as I think the second part is about a dark fiber, whether those are as options. I think that was the question, right? So are there any initial thoughts with the council member on this?
So I can speak up on half of that.
Thank you, Larry.
On the dark fiber piece, I know that Caltrans has been inventorying, and we're figuring out what we are allowed to do, and then we'll be planning from there. So nothing to announce right now, but that is absolutely something we're looking at.
All right, we got 50% question resolved. That's good. I don't know if there's any anybody want to chime in about whether this council is looking to the fairness of pricing, whether that's within the scope of this council.
This is Sarah. I mean, if providers will voluntarily provide that information, then that's great if the council can do it. But my understanding is that probably you're going to have a data request in order to get that. And whether providers will provide you with that information is an entirely different question.
Yeah.
This is Laura at the State Library. It may not entirely address the question that's being asked, but there is data available through USAC. They're reporting features as a result of the 7th report and order for publicly available pricing information on what schools and libraries and tribal and healthcare are paying. And it should be available on a state local level. So that is something that we could look into. But again, it's not the consumer level necessarily, but it might give us some idea.
Thank you, Laura, for that. Sunny, I saw you coming off the mute.
I just wanted to say, I think we spent quite a bit of time talking about the need for affordable broadband. This is only the 10th year in which the council has discussed it. And that you had a focus that I want to commend and just underscore of the intensity of outreach to take advantage of what the federal government is already doing. We just need to have the internet service providers use all of their innovation, their expertise to help us get the word out. That's the prize at this point. Without getting drawn into any other unnecessary debates or research, just get California's fair share of the money that is available.
Right. Thank you for that comment. I think what I'm hearing is, there's a lot of things to focus on, and then there's also, if not all, at least probably good information that are out there in the public. And probably the primary focus at this point is trying to make sure we get the information out to consumers so they know all of their options in terms of signing up, whether that leads to or a specific asset that conduct a price fairness comparison. We may or may not even have access to all the information that we need to do so. So I think unless there's a strong interest or a strong, a desire by the public that this is something we shall do, I would venture to say probably this is not a priority at the moment, because there's just a lot of things we're focusing on and trying to get people connected with the various means and outreach opportunity. If that's amenable to this council, let's proceed with that, and it would definitely be an area that open to continue to monitor. And as our members of the public bring it up as further request as this thing evolves. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm not seeing any further comments or inquiries. I'd like to go ahead and close this third and final meeting of the Broadband Council for 2021. What a year this has been. I just want to take a moment to really just pile on all of the recognition accolades that the members have given to the staff, and especially I want to add it to all the council member who has been consistently participating in this, and then also all of our members of the public who has been logging in regularly and just continue to contribute to this topic. And of course, our very esteemed panel of advisory members that has been advising the Broadband Council in what to cover, what are the area that we should focusing on. It's just a really, it takes a village to do all of this. And I'm really, really just honored to be part of all of the dedicated individuals and passionate individuals on how to move as fast as we can to close the digital divide in California. So with that said, looking forward to more engagement in 2022 alongside with the Middle Mile Action Committee, as well as with a strong focus from this council on adoption and doing everything we can to provide services to residents. Any council members or I'm just gonna open up. Hey, you know, I'm gonna break some rules right here. It's the last meeting. Any council member and even advisory members want to chime in and say something to close out the year. This is the opportunity to do so.
I would disappoint you if I didn't jump in, Amy. And I because I've said it, but I just need to underscore how great I think you are leading, and everybody, all the state agencies contributing. And I put that in chat, but somehow we seem to be blocked. So if you don't want me to speak each time, let me, give me the chat function back or something, because I will use it. Okay.
No, we'd love to have you to speak up, Sunny. That's why the chat is no longer functioning. All right, any other members? You just all want to go to lunch, huh? All right, then have a great rest of the year. We will see you in the new year. Take care.